2 weeks ago, I made these window pop-up looking things to try and set up a visual language for the channel. I ended up picking this one. It fits the vibe that I want to go for the most. And this week I want to continue on that and try to animate it. The first thing I did was lower the resolution to 270 pixels by 480 pixels. The previous resolution of 360 by 640 gave me a bit too much detail to work with, and I wasn't super happy with it. 270 is a lot closer to what the NES had to offer, which was 240 pixels tall. Obviously the aspect ratio is a lot wider, but still it should give a little bit more of a pixel art feel. I also added a bit more detail in the window. I made all the edges a bit more beefy. I added some detail on top with the little map of Europe that I'm actually very proud of. I made the scan lines a little bit more obvious, and I changed the text to end up with what you see here. I also, again, changed the color palette. This time I think I made it a little bit too dull, so I'll definitely keep working on it, but I feel like I have something a bit better this time. Alright, now onto the animation. I'd never done any kind of frame-by-frame animation before, so that was new. And in case you also want to learn about the interface in Aseprite, here's a bit of a crash course. These are your layers. If you're not familiar with them, layers are a little bit like drawing on transparent sheets of paper and then stacking them on top of each other. You can add a new layer by pressing Shift-N, and you can double-click them to open the properties, change the names, or change the blending modes, like the way it blends with everything underneath it. In this direction, you have your frames, and again, it's pretty straightforward. You add a new frame by pressing Alt-N, and whatever layer plus frame you've got selected is whatever you're currently changing. You'll notice that some frames are linked together, like you have this continuous band going across them. You can link cells together if you don't want them to change from one frame to another. You can do that by either selecting them, then right-clicking and choosing link cells, which is pretty straightforward, or you can have Aseprite do that automatically by pressing this little toggle, but this will only act upon new frames that you're creating. If at any point you want to see the frame before and the one after the one you're working on, you can toggle the onion skin right here. Okay, so first, to kind of familiarize myself with the interface and the workflow, I started by making a bit of an idle animation. I'll make the opening animation later on in the video. I did a few things. I made the scan lines actually scan the screen. I made the text bob up and down as if it was kind of hovering above the screen. I added a little bit of moving details in the top. I made the wires back a little bit, and I think I'm eventually going to do something with the button, but I haven't done anything yet, so here's what it looks like. For the opening animation, I gave myself 12 frames, including the first frame of the idling animation. Aseprite is by default working at 10 frames a second, so 12 frames was a bit more than 1 second, which is pretty short. So obviously the different animations, the different moving parts were going to overlap a little bit. That's actually a good thing. You don't want one thing to happen and then it takes a while, and then another thing happens, and then it takes a while, and another thing happens, because you end up with a very slow and kind of sluggish animation. If everything kind of flows into each other, like by the time your brain has registered one thing is happening, another thing has started getting ready to happen, it makes the animation both a bit tighter and it makes it a bit more pleasant to watch. I actually worked backwards for this one, so I started with the end by making the screen, the button and the text kind of fade away, and then for everything else I took the elements one by one and I sort of closed them. For the mechanical parts I worked in pose to pose, meaning that I obviously started with the open state, then I immediately made a closed state, and then I sort of did an in-betweening. You want people to have the time to register that something is moving, so actually each element takes I think 6 frames to move, and it takes like 4 frames to do only like maybe 15% of the movement, and the bulk of it happens in just 2 frames. But that way your brain has time to register that something is happening, and then the quick movement makes it have a bit more impact, a bit more show. Again, to add impact, I added a bit of a shake after every movement. In order to finish off, I just added a bit more fluff. Because these are mechanical parts and they are supposed to be heavy, I'm not sure how much kind of squash and stretch I should be using, but I ended up adding a little bit of smear on the edges just to give it a bit more, to make it a bit more smooth. I ended up with this, which I'm pretty happy with. I'll probably do a closing animation someday, but right now I need to get the video out, so I think I'm going to stop there. I hope that was useful somehow. I feel like I have enough of the basics now that I can start working on like the actual meat and potatoes of the thing. So not next week, because I have another plan for next week, but in 2 weeks I'll actually start working on, well, the overlay that I've been talking about for like 2 weeks now. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the video, take care, and I'll see you next week.